Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, I think we've got everybody back here. So welcome once again to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Our tradition is to, at this point, to go around and introduce ourselves. I would suggest that we take a little pause before the next person, or after the next person, so that everybody can hear our name. Is there anybody here for the first time, or here after a long absence? I guess we're all old friends. So let me begin. My name is Oswaldo.
My name is Gary.
Amir.
I'm Tom.
My name is Michael.
Harry.
My name is Jim.
I'm David.
Gary.
Jim. Ben.
Ruth.
Mike.
My name is Roy.
I'm Jerry.
I'm Rob.
My name is Clint.
I'm Peter.
My name is Jerry. I'm Larry. I'm Ray. Jack.
Michael.
Tim.
Tim.
David.
My name is Joe. Risha.
My name is Jeff.
I'm Hal.
Michael.
Bob. I'm Richard.
Jay.
I moved.
And we skipped over Pat. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Danadasa. He was here last Sunday. This is the second of a four-part Dharma talk series. Today's topic will be using the mind to free the mind. Danadasa has been practicing with the San Francisco Buddhist Center right here, the community, since 1993, and was ordained in 2011. His current area of exploration is Buddha's teachings on anatta and emptiness. And as he mentioned in the beginning, often mystifying to many Westerners, the Buddha described his teachings as deep, hard to see, hard to realize, and beyond the scope of reason, and subtle. And so looking forward to that. And one person didn't get to introduce himself.
I'm Dennis.
Dennis, welcome.
Stephanie.
Oh, yes. Welcome both. Okay. Welcome, Danadasa. Looking forward to part two.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Osvaldo, and lovely to see all of you again. Some familiar faces and some new faces. Again, my name is Danadasa, and this is a week 2 of a 4-week series on exploring the teachings of no self, which is a translation of anatta, and also emptiness, which is a translation of shunyata. So at the conclusion of last week, I invited people to consider taking on some practice commitments during the week to meditate more, and then to actually take a closer look at the nature of our experience, and perhaps notice something that we hadn't noticed before. So a couple little questions that I put up there suggested was, what else is there? What am I not seeing? And what is the shape of my mind? And just to sort of review, just this, what else is there and what am I not seeing? What I described last week was, these are questions that I frequently will ask myself, and I use these two questions, the ones in the middle, what else is there and what am I not seeing, to actually interrupt a negative mind stream. So a very good example is I will sometimes have quite a short fuse at work. and I'll find myself becoming quite impatient, kind of frustrated, etc., etc. And then the stories will start to spin out. And when I notice that this is happening, I will pause when I have got my A game on. I will pause and just interrupt that mind stream with these questions of, okay, well, this is what's happening. What else is there? And what am I not seeing? So I was wondering if we could spend about 5 minutes. If anybody did any of these practice commitments during this week and would like to share something, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people for a few minutes. Did anyone over the course of this past week notice anything new in their experience as a result of what I spoke about last week? Could you start with your name,
My name is
please?
Gary.
Gary, thank you.
I took your invitation to ask these 2 questions about any story that was front and center for me. So the first thing I noticed was I'm all about stories. And I began to not judge myself so much for the stories and just let them be. And something is shifting.
Thank you, Gary. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I did more and more regular meditation as well, and then started contemplating some of these questions and had some deep realizations about space and time, which I won't go into. But yeah, it was an interesting shift. Very interesting shift.
Yes, sir.
I got fixated on a Buddha quotation that you wrote up there last week. That which one brings to mind frequently becomes the tendency of the mind. And part of the understanding that I had of that was that if you keep thinking about something negative, that keeps you in a negative space. If you think about something positive, it puts you in a more positive space. And the place where I got to thinking became a dilemma for me in that, there's a lot of negative stuff going on in the government right now. It's very easy to get sucked into that. And so I want to get my mind out of that. But you can't effect change without thinking about something. So where is the line, whether it's something that big or something personal, if you have a personal problem and you need to affect change, if you don't think about it, how do you manage to make the change that needs to be happening? So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what is your name?
Jay.
Jay. Thank you, Jay. Well, that question is really a perfect segue into the topic at hand of using the mind to free the mind. And before we get into this topic, I wanted to go back to a couple questions from the end of last week's session. I'll start with a simple one. I think it was Jay who asked this question about fame and disrepute, and sort of juxtaposed fame with anonymity. So I think fame in terms of like famous and anonymous. And this is another translation of the same pairing of status and disgrace. So this is just simply our good name, our good reputation.
Status meaning high status.
Well, it's status in terms of whatever it is that you want, however you identify yourself. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm a good Buddhist, I don't get angry, or something like that. Or somebody accuses you of being angry, or somebody accuses you of lying, or something like that. So it's really internally how you relate to the story of me, and you want that to be a good story. You want to project that out, and you want other people to see that good story. So that's all that pairing is pointing at. The second question was Clint's question of how do you see what you cannot see? And it's also very similar to your question, Jay. How do you use the mind to change the mind, to transform the mind? Because we do have to think about things. So around this question of seeing what we cannot see, this is one of my favorite quotes from Rainer Maria Rilke, and this is about questions, the relationship to questions, and we're talking about very deep questions here, questions which do not readily have answers to, answers that must be discovered, that must present themselves, that must emerge. And they will emerge when our minds, our hearts are ready to be able to actually receive the answer. So I'll just read this quote. Be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given to you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Perhaps you will then gradually, without knowing it, live along some distant day into the answer. So if you are here looking for answers, I'm not going to be giving a whole lot of answers. I'll be actually giving you a lot more questions than answers. So now onward to the topic at hand, using the mind to free the mind. And here I've put two quotes up here, which will actually inform the next 3 weeks that we are together. The first quote is by Yogi Berra, who was a professional baseball manager. And he was quite beloved because he's very well known for his kitchen table wisdom. He would just say the most delightful things. But this is one of my favorite quotes. He once said, "It's amazing what you can see when you look." Love this quote. It's amazing what you can see when you look. And this quote's so fascinating because, first of all, it makes a distinction between looking and seeing. And also, it makes the implication that oftentimes we're not looking, so we don't see. Or when we're not looking, all we'll see is just these stories that are kind of constantly playing in our minds. It's amazing what you can see when you look. And I juxtapose this with a quote by Rob Burbea. And Rob Burbea, he's a Buddhist practitioner. He practices with Insight Meditation Society. And he lives in England at a place called Gaia House. He's one of their head teachers. He's an absolutely amazing teacher. And this is a summary. It's not a direct quote. It's close enough. How you look affects what you see. How you look affects what you see. So I'll be coming back to this idea of looking, seeing, and also playing around with different ways of looking. And by playing around with different ways of looking, which is essentially using the mind, we can actually completely change our experience, both in our minds and our hearts and in our bodies. How you look affects what you see. And this is the pathway of using the mind to free the mind. So first I'm going to start with some definitions, some kind of intellectual ideas, and then we'll go into these ideas much more experientially. We'll explore them. So this is a very, very brief overview of one of the developments in Buddhist thought, Buddhist teachings. So up top I've written 3 words: impermanence, no self, or anatta, and emptiness, and shunyata. So these are 3 very important teachings in Buddhism, and there is a relationship between these 3 teachings. So the first teaching of impermanence, this is the teaching that's most easily easiest to understand intellectually. It's very simple. All things change. All things change, right? And you don't have to look that hard at your experience to see the truth in this. Right? It would be very, very difficult to argue against that idea that all things change. So all things change, readily acceptable. And then moving into anatta, all things change, including the story of me. Right? So it's impermanence applied to what I think of as me, right? The story of me. So we can start to play with this transition from this idea of a fixed self, or this experience of a fixed self, and moving into something that's much more fluid, much more dynamic. And this is a quote from what's called the Abhidharma tradition, which really explored this area, this topic of anatta in great detail. And what the Abhidharma tradition did was they started looking at this stream of constantly changing moments of experience. And they actually defined the I as this continuous stream of constantly changing moments of experience. And these moments of experience they call dhammas. And these dhammas are categorized. So these different schools within the Abhidharma have these different lists of these dhammas, or these constantly changing moments of experience. So things get sort of parsed up very, very, very finely in this way of thinking, to get at this idea of a fluidity of self. Now, what happened around this is still one can come away with the sense that there still is a self, that there is this self that is fluid rather than a self that is fixed. And emptiness, these emptiness teachings, shunyata, takes this even one step further and emptiness says, well, actually, even the idea of a fluid self is completely empty. And empty is a funny word to use. And emptiness is that all phenomena are devoid of immutable, intrinsic nature. Nothing exists independent of the mind. So, from this perspective, everything is completely empty. So I've heard this teaching many times. Right? Okay. What's that supposed to mean? What am I supposed to do with that? And this is where we get into some really interesting terrain. So what do we do with this? All right, so we're going to look at 3 different approaches to how we go about changing our minds, how we go about freeing our minds. Right? And here I've written on the left-hand side the 3 main schools of Buddhism, or the 3 main developments of Buddhism. There's the Theravada, followed by the Mahayana, followed by the Vajrayana. And these 3 schools developed sequentially in time. And on the right-hand side, I've just written some shorthand about the methods that are primary in these 3 approaches. So next to the Theravada approach, I've written self-development or self-discipline. And then followed by that, next to the Mahayana, I've written self-surrender. And then beside Vajrayana, I've written self-discovery. So today, we'll be really exploring this approach of self-development or self-discipline, the Theravada approach. And then next week, we'll really be delving into the self-surrender approach and the self-discovery approach over the next following 2 weeks. Right, so in terms of freeing the mind, what I'm pointing at here are insight practices. So perhaps some of you have heard this distinction between practices which are conducive to calm, which are called samatha practices, and practices which are specifically insight practices or vipassana practices. Samatha, calming practices, vipassana, insight practices. So what we'll be exploring here are actually insight practices. Now, before we start exploring these insight practices, there are some very important preliminaries that I will very briefly touch upon. So these two preliminaries are integration and positive emotion. So again, these are words, like what's that supposed to mean, integration, what's positive emotion supposed to mean? Many people will have different answers to this. And I'll just very briefly say what I am pointing at and why these are important preliminaries to insight practice. So in terms of integration, what integration is pointing at is it is pointing at the unification of the mind. So when we look at our normal day-to-day waking minds, we may notice that our minds tend to be all over the place. There seems to be many different things happening in our minds. It almost feels like it's simultaneous, as if it's simultaneous. Our minds are very active. And this process of unifying the mind is this process of training the mind to be able to direct our minds towards a given object of attention, and a well-trained mind will actually just move right into that chosen object of attention naturally, without any resistance and without leaving anything behind. So we develop the ability to apply our undivided and wholehearted attention upon our chosen object of attention. This is one way of looking at integration. In Buddhist terms, this is referred to as the skill of sustained attention, the ability to direct the mind, hold the mind on a given topic. Integration. So, of course, when we're approaching insight practices, this is actually, it's a very important skill no matter what you do. Anything you take on, the ability to direct the mind and hold your mind upon a given topic is of value. And it's particularly of particular value when approaching insight practices. So this is integration. Positive emotion. So in terms of positive emotion, here I will just really speak of kindness. Kindness and acceptance. So again, when we start to explore what our minds are doing and engage in this process of transforming the mind, right, there's this old cliche saying of start where you are. And this requires us to look closely at our minds, the habitual patterns of our minds. So sustained attention is a very valuable skill to do that. What is the shape of my mind? And when we look, we will find things that we like, and we will also find things that we don't like. I certainly do. And when we find things that we don't like, if you recall, one of the pairs from the 8 worldly winds was pleasure and pain, right? Where we have this sort of almost innate tendency to move towards pleasure and avoid pain. So when we start to look at our own experience and we see things within ourselves that we don't like, our tendency can be to turn away, to push it away. Or if we have a well-developed inner critic, I am my harshest critic, that sort of thing, when we see something we don't like, we may start beating ourselves up about it. I'm so bad, there's some... that can create its own story. So what this stage of positive emotion is pointing at, it is this developing the skill of turning towards what is there, everything that is there, including the pleasant and the unpleasant, and accepting what is there without judgment and without aversion. It's acceptance. To turn towards with kindness. So this is integration and this is positive emotion. I could actually give a series of talks on this topic, but we're just going to keep moving on. So, how do we transform our minds? So, as Jay was saying, there's so much stuff going on in the world. We have to use our minds. We have to think about these things to transform our minds. And this is absolutely right. Absolutely right. So in terms of the Theravadan approach of self-discipline, let's start talking about this. Okay, I'd like to give you an example of using the mind to free the mind. So this example, it comes from a good friend of mine who's a recovering alcoholic. And he told me this story once about how he deals with road rage. So he says, I'll be driving along and some jerk off will cut me off. So I was like, I can't believe that. Just immediately triggers this response of anger and rage and how dare, blah, 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 blah. And when he becomes aware that this is what's going on, like just playing this tape of road rage, entering into this mind stream of road rage, what he will say to himself to interrupt this mind stream is he will say to himself, oh, come on, give the guy a break. The liquor store is about to close. And that was my exact response. I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. It made me laugh, it makes him laugh. And when he does this, it just completely shifts the entire experience. So it's very interesting, this thing about using the mind to free the mind. How we look affects what we see. So we could look from this place of the story of me. This is what I want, this is what I don't want. Here's some jerk off cutting me off, I don't like it. I'm going to get pissed off and I'm going to defend what I want. And there's another narrative that we could take on, another way of looking, another way that just simply leads to freedom. So you can feel it, this idea of like, the liquor store's about to close. This dissolving of this other story that feels really contracting, that feels toxic, that feels angry, that goes nowhere. Well, actually it does go somewhere. It goes down the rabbit hole. And we can instantly, skillfully, actually pull ourselves out of that. We can dissolve that story by simply replacing it with another story. So this is something that's really, really fascinating when we start to think about fixed self and fluid self, this idea of a fixed self. So fixed self, I like to replace the word fixed self with like fixation, obsession, fixation. I think these words are much more evocative, much more relevant to our modern day culture. So if one describes oneself as, I tend to worry a lot, or I tend to get angry a lot. These things, these aspects of ourselves can feel so deeply entrenched that they feel like, how could I ever change that? So there's something quite sort of fixed about that way of being in the world. It's as if we have become that thing, this story. I am an angry person. Something gets stuck, some narrative gets stuck. Or some narrative becomes this habituated mind stream, which we then continue to engage in, and then we simply become that mind stream. So a fluid self is a mind which is able to actually let go of stories, to release our hold on stories. So in terms of stories, it's quite interesting with stories because I like to think of our minds as story-making machines. And it's very interesting with stories, because a lot of our stories, if you look closely at them, a lot of our stories tend to not be that accurate. They tend to be exaggerated, especially if it's about the story of me. So I will notice in the story of me, when I'm wrapped up in it, a lot of all or nothing thinking. You may have noticed this as well. Like, this person is always doing this. This person never listens to me. So you can notice how the mind will just make up stories which have sometimes, at times, like no bearing on what's actually happening. And then you notice when we get into these stories, he never listens to me. We actually will create an entire world, a mind world, that springs forth from this story. So in this approach of using the mind to free the mind, we can actually create other stories. So the approach here is to develop a multiplicity of views, a multiplicity of ways of looking, and to recognize which ways of looking lead towards pain and suffering, contraction, and which stories, which ways of looking lead towards openness, lead towards freedom. Right, so in this Theravadan approach of self-development, you will come across a lot of teachings that really emphasize this approach of self-discipline, self-development. So you will find advice such as guarding the gates of the senses. There's a book called the Dhammapada, which is a collection of sayings from the Buddha. And in the Dhammapada, you will find lots of language about reining in the mind, of controlling the mind. It will compare the mind to like a wild horse that needs to be tamed. So there's a tremendous amount of language in this approach, in the Pali Canon, this language of restraint. You will also find what are called the 4 right efforts as well. And these 4 right efforts are also about restraint as well. So the first of these is called abandoning unskillful states of mind that have arisen. The liquor store is closing. The second right effort is guarding against the arising of unskillful mental states that have yet to arise. And this is more of a defensive stance of guarding the gates of the senses. And this is a process of knowing what our triggers are. And if we can know what our triggers are, we can recognize when those triggers are arising, when those conditions arise, and hopefully act proactively to prevent those negative mental states from arising. Prevent ourselves from actually going down that rabbit hole. Those are the first 2 of the right efforts. The second 2 of the right efforts have to do with skillful mental states. And these are skillful states are those which lead to freedom, openness. And this is arousing or cultivating positive mental states that have yet to arise. So there's the cultivation, the arousal, and then there is the maintaining and developing of mental states which have already arisen. So the 4 right efforts. Again, this is a self-developmental model. Okay, we got time for this. So we're going to do a little guided meditation exercise around this experience of just using the mind to shift our consciousness. So first, I'm going to preview with you what we're going to do is I'm going to invite all of us to bring to mind two different experiences in our life. So the first experience I'm going to invite everybody to bring to mind is some aspect of our lives that is a source of stress for us, a source of frustration for us. Perhaps it's a relationship, somebody in your family, something. Doesn't matter what it is. I'll just invite you to bring to mind some source of stress and frustration in your life. Then I'll just invite all of us to just notice how that feels, what's going on in our bodies, hearts and minds, the stories. And then I'm going to invite us all to take 3 deep breaths. And then I'm going to invite us to bring to mind something that is a source of joy and inspiration to us. Something that brings us peace, brings us calm. Perhaps this is your favorite thing to do. Or perhaps this is a favorite piece of music. Or a place in nature, a place that is special to you. So I'll ask you to bring to mind something along those lines, a source of inspiration, calm, peace. And again, we'll just notice how that affects our experience. Any questions about those instructions? Yeah. Okay. Ms. Walter, if I could ask you to pass the bell to me.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
So should we do these in any order?
I'll actually guide us through this.
Okay.
Yes. So let's just spend a moment sitting quietly. And now, bring to mind some aspect of your life that is a source of frustration, of stress or anxiety. And bring to mind as many details as you would like. The things you do not like about this situation. Any stories about self-righteousness, unfairness, not getting what I want. And notice the narratives that are passing through your mind. Notice what's happening in your heart, your emotional tone. And your bodily sensations. And just ask yourself, where is this leading? Now, let's all take 3 deep, intentional breaths together. And on the out breath, just let go. Let go of that story. Release, release, release. And after your 3 breaths, just allow your body to breathe naturally. And now, bring to mind some aspect of your life that brings you joy, nourishment, inspiration, peace. And just notice what's happening in your mind. And notice your emotional tone. And your bodily sensations. Okay, in terms of suggested practice commitments for this week to come, those are the 4 from the previous week. And I added 2 new suggested practice commitments. The first one is actually quite a challenging one. It's to do nothing. To do nothing. Just to do nothing. And if you decided to do this, I would actually suggest scheduling this in your calendar. Yeah, I would suggest this. You block out a half-hour time. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing nothing. And maybe that doing nothing also involves drinking a cup of tea and staring out the window. But we're not planning. We're not trying to accomplish anything. We're just going to do nothing. So the value of doing nothing is that for these deeper questions, for answers to arise, for answers to present themselves, to emerge, we just simply need to actually create some space for that to happen. So doing nothing is a very good condition for actually deeper reflection to arise, and also for these big questions to sort of sink in more deeply, and for the answers to present themselves. You will also notice this, you may notice this as well in terms of this practice of spending time to do nothing. This doesn't mean just try and not think, right? Just allow your mind to run free, to roam free. Just allow your mind to do what it wants. And you may notice that when you do this practice of doing nothing, and you're also engaged in a meditation practice, you may notice a very interesting effect of doing nothing, the effect of doing nothing upon your meditation practice. So that's something that it's very interesting to explore. The second activity is closely related to the first one, but the second one is more kinesthetic, which is go for a walk with no destination. You're not running an errand, you're not walking the dog, you're not actually going anywhere. Go for a walk with no destination. And here, what's behind this suggested practice commitment is entering into a mental space, a consciousness, a way of being in the world that is much more open and receptive. So we like to think that we have control over our experience. And there are aspects of our experience that we do have control over. But in fact, a vast majority of our experience, we have absolutely no control over it. No control whatsoever. So by doing things like going for a walk with no destination, we sort of move out of this way of being in the world where we're trying to be productive, get something, do something, be someone, be somewhere. And we're just entering into a much more open way of being, a much more open way of relating to our experience. So it's 11:50. So I was hoping we could spend maybe 5 minutes fielding if anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to share. And if you could say your name first.
My name is Jerry.
Jerry.
Last week I thought also for the practice you had to take 3 breaths because I was using that one. Is that correct? Or
That's right.
Did I make it up? Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what is your name?
My name is Michael.
Michael.
First of all, I want to thank you very much for your presentation. I mean, it was so well organized and put together. And in addition to that, there was something about the whole gestalt of the presentation that I thought was remarkably beautiful. And it raised 2 questions for me that I really want to frame it into one form of question. What we're talking about here is what we do consciously in order to evolve. And I would just like you to respond. I have the following 2 things to respond to that I'd like you to respond to. One, I heard an extraordinary statistic that I've been carrying for weeks, and it was something about the fact that our conscious mind processes something like 40 bits of information per second, and our unconscious mind processes 11 million or 11 billion. But the difference is like staggering. And so, what we're talking about here is like working with our conscious mind, which, considering what's going on in our unconscious mind, we are really challenged to use our conscious mind as the sole vehicle to change the shape of our experience. That's one thing. And another thing that I've been thinking about lately and personally experienced is like there's this thing about somatic energy, about this whole philosophy about we carry energy in certain parts of our body. And I personally have recently had an experience where I had a somatic healing experience that could not possibly have been induced by any kind of intellectual or mental discipline. And yet, without having done that, were severe limitations on what I might have been able to do with the app. So if you could respond to anything there that you think is interesting.
Yeah, I will definitely address those 2 topics in the next 2 weeks. And what was your name again?
Michael.
Michael. Thank you, Michael. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir. What's your name?
David.
David.
I was noticing this week, after last week's meeting, that I appreciated your inviting us to take the practice more seriously and giving us homework. I find that I come here, I leave, I go about my business. I mean, I don't often have homework from this experience, and I was thinking about you throughout the week, really. Not that I did anything, but I thought about doing it, and
You're already doing nothing for this.
Right, check. And Jim?
Yes.
Jim.
I couldn't come last week, but there was a transmission anyway because I had, well, the fires. I had 7 friends who were evacuating, so I was extremely distressed all week, and it looked apocalyptic, and I was creatively stuck in doing some projects of my own. And I'm a student of the I Ching, and for 3 days in a row, I got the same hexagram, which is biting through. You're gnawing on something, and there's a lie involved, and there's a misunderstanding involved. And finally, it came that I should increase my sense of my own innocence rather than just trashing with my story that all was woe. And it reminded me of a quote, and I don't know by who, but that in our unconscious we have a bright shadow. It's all the good things about us that we have misplaced or are in denial of. I just thought, anyway, I was happy to be in sync with your teachings. And once we had a little huddle here about what a good teacher you are. So
Thank you, Jim. Tom?
Thank you so much, Danadasa. I just wanted to say, you know, when you put up the purpose behind the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, it occurred to me that I spent like the first 40 years of my life on self-development, self-improvement. And then like the next 10 years was about self-discovery, like looking within, which is kind of the Buddhist practice, like something that doesn't have to be created, it's already inherent. And now just reaching a point like over the last 5 years where it's all about just surrender. So it was really interesting seeing those stacked up. I never looked at it that way. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, we'll have some fun next week with that. Yeah.
You had a question from back there.
Thank you for everything. When I started reading the question, go for a walk with no destination, what occurred to me was how difficult that is, because every time I walk out of the house, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to go relax. I'm going to walk to the park. I'm going to even think about going out without having a destination in mind seems extraordinarily difficult.
Clint.
I loved your road rage stories.
That's a good one.
And I was driving here. There was on Valencia, and there was a green light ahead. I thought, I can make that green light. But there's this guy right in front of me going really slowly and had a headset on. And we both missed the light because he's doing it. And I was just full of rage and calling in my mind every name I could think of. So I was trying to use your friend's example and saying, well, first of all, I said, you shouldn't have a headset on, that's against the law. And I thought, well, it's a pretty day, he's enjoying this day, he's listening to music he enjoys, and so that's really nice. So thank you for giving me another version of what I was thinking of, and he's this terrible person.
Jerry. What came up for me this week is how much fear I'm in from outside stuff going on. And I don't think I've been in so much fear in a long time. And it'd be interesting to address, I'm sure you can use all of these, but just address and to go through the fear.
Yeah, that's a very rich topic. Hal?
When we did our meditation, I found that the negative aspect, the source of negativity in my life at present is sorrow. And I've been feeling it this week for all the people who have been displaced or killed or had their lives completely erased by the fires. I have a personal source of sorrow in my life. So that's an aspect of negativity that I find imperative to deal with.
Thank you, Hal. Any other comments? What is your name?
Peter.
Peter.
I saw the documentary about the Oakland Police Department, the force, and I live in Oakland. And I couldn't sleep that night trying to solve the problem of the Oakland Police Department until I realized it wasn't up to me to solve the problem of the Oakland Police Department, but I was aware of the complexity of the problem. And I don't know what to do. And that's sort of a metaphor for our whole national situation.
Yeah. No doubt.
Well, we're at noon time, so we should be winding this up, but we'll be around for a little bit afterwards in case people come up with more homework for you. So at this point we do announcements. Any announcements? Usually there's 2 or 3. Yes, Tom.
So I think about a dozen of us went on a tour about 2 years ago up to the retirement community in Santa Rosa, where Jerry lives. So we've seen it, we've been there. Is it still standing?
It is standing, nothing around it is.
Okay.
What did you say? Nothing around it is?
Yeah,
the whole neighborhood's gone.
So I've been going over those, what is there, what am I not seeing, what is the shape of my mind, and I'm confused about it all.
Do you have any idea when you'll be able to go back home?
Weeks from now.
Weeks.
Okay. This is Fountain Lodge.
Not very long.
Okay. Thank you.
With that sobering announcement, any other comments or announcements? If that's the case, then we do have a host. Jay.
I'm Jay, and I'm your host. There are refreshments there. Just a couple of things about the refreshments. The dates have pits, so be careful about that. And if you have any concerns about citrus, the apple slices were baked in lemon juice to keep them from browning. So if citrus is a problem, just be aware of that. Please wash, dry, and return your tea cup to the rack after you're finished with your tea. I'll be going around with the Donner Bowl. Our suggested donation is $10, or as Jim once said, anywhere between $10 and $1,000. And we never turn anyone away for lack of contribution or whatever you do contribute. There's a newcomer's sign-up sheet if you'd like to be on the mailing list. It's right there against the wall to the right. And some members go to lunch after the meeting. They congregate at the front door at 12:30. Everyone is welcome.
And to add to the passing the Donner Bowl around, that helps sustain all the activities of the Sangha, including the rental of this place and the Larkin Street lunches that happen once a month, and on our reach to other people with our mailing lists. So, I guess this calls for our dedication of merit, and I suggest that we keep in mind all those people near us that have been suffering, as well as all of those that have been suffering in the last few horrendous natural disasters. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.